Hello, this is Leaf, and I am starting off the Group 3 project. The other people in my group are Dylan, Jamie, Nicole, Elena, and Daisy. The topic that my group decided on was fast fashion and the environmental impacts of the fashion industry. In order to truly address resource usage and pollution as a whole, we need to look at the big industries that wield the greatest proportion of power. And one of the worst offenders is the fashion industry. And now for an introduction on the clothing slash fashion industry. For most of human history, clothing was either homemade or custom made for you by someone else. Clothing was expensive, and it was normal for people to hold on to what they had for as long as they could. Clothing moved from being a trade to an industry with the invention of sewing machines, factories, and places like department stores. Clothing was no longer custom made and became mass produced and made in set sizes. With this shift in the production of clothing, many things changed, and the industry only continued to grow. As the industry grew, its worst practices and philosophies became evident, especially in the area of fast fashion. And what is fast fashion, and what are the issues involving it? Well, fast fashion is fashion that attempts to replicate the styles of higher-end brands at much lower prices. This isn't a problem in itself, but the problem is how these brands achieve the lower prices. They achieve these lower prices by using cheaper materials, cheaper labor, and they contract factories in countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and China, which have very unethical working conditions, and we'll get into that later on in the presentation. Traditional designer brands only have 2 or 4 seasons or collections of clothes that are produced each year. Fast fashion brands produce new product all year and stimulate high amounts of demand so that customers are always buying. This means that much more clothing is produced by fast fashion brands than designer brands. And much of the business of fast fashion relies on people buying more clothes than they actually need or might even want. Since the clothing is so cheap and it's just ready in the store to buy, it's much easier for them to buy clothing than how it used to be when you had to get clothing custom made. And what is the size of the fashion industry? Well, the fashion industry globally is worth $2.5 trillion. It's one of the largest industries worldwide, and many fast fashion brands are the top companies in the industry. The third largest brand is Inditex, and that's the company that, among others, owns Zara, and they are worth the most of the fast fashion brands at over $100 billion. One of the most popular fast fashion brands is H&M, and they are worth over $23 billion. And although not quite fast fashion, the top 2 brands are LVMH, which owns many luxury brands like Louis Vuitton, and they are worth over $180 billion. And the second largest brand is Nike, and they're worth over $100 billion. So clearly, it's a very large industry, and they employ millions and millions of people. And what are the problems that we are going to address with this industry? Well, mainly we are going to focus on the environmental impact from their product, and this includes the pollution from gathering materials and their use of resources, and it also includes the environmental hazards of the production and the hazards involved with labor. We're also going to discuss the environmental impact of the clothing when we're done with it and we discard it. What happens to those clothes and what are those effects on the environment? And we're also going to go over what we can do to remedy these problems and what the alternative methods are.
Fast fashion as the making, buying, and selling of clothes as quickly as possible for a cheap price. While this is true, this type of fashion does come at a price. The fast fashion industry is responsible for large amounts of air and water pollution. The production of this clothing makes up 10% of total global carbon emissions, and 85% of textiles go into rivers each year. Not only does this industry pollute rivers, but it also dries up water resources, as it takes thousands of gallons of water to produce one item of clothing. In 2018, Qantas International released a report that states the three main sources of the industry's pollution impacts are from the dyeing and finishing of garments, yarn preparation, and fiber production. Large amounts of water are diverted from surface and groundwater for cotton cultivation, and the dyeing and finishing, yarn preparation, and fiber production are highly responsible for resource depletion and are extremely energy intensive. Also, materials used in production, such as synthetic fibers, take hundreds of years to biodegrade and are often deposited into local water systems. Furthermore, any clothing not sold in stores usually becomes solid waste in landfills. The average American generates 82 pounds of textile waste each year, and the making of these textiles release large amounts of harmful particles into the air, like hydrogen chloride. Fast fashion companies are constantly and aggressively trying to meet production targets, which creates hazardous work environments. The garment assembly employs 40 million people worldwide, with most being women and 80% being between the ages of 18 and 24. Assembly workers often experience respiratory hazards due to poor ventilation and musculoskeletal injuries due to repetitive movements without any breaks. Due to fast fashion brands subcontracting, these large name brands hold no legal obligations to ensure safe work environments, and the subcontractors usually operate without government regulation, so this leads to poorly kept facilities. The employers also often use short-term contracts, so the constant threat of termination keeps workers from reporting these hazards. In an article by Green America, some women reported that they were not even allowed to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water, or else their supervisors would punish them. In these workplaces, there was also a lot of gender-based violence, as mostly women made up the workforce and mostly men made up the management. Women often faced physical, mental, and sexual abuse, and this ranking system usually deters women from reporting this abuse. In the fast fashion industry, most employees earn just the legal minimum wage, but the minimum wage is the max end of their salary, as many people earn much, much less than this. In places like Asia, where production takes place, the legal minimum wages are often the poverty wages. The salaries these workers make only cover about 70% of their monthly food expenses, which does not include other necessities such as rent or health care. In essence, fast fashion companies look for the cheapest way to produce clothing by setting up production in countries with the lowest minimum wages possible and exploit people as a source of cheap labor. In other words, when you find great deals on new clothes, what you're actually seeing is horribly long hours and low pay of garment factory workers.
Not some 30 years ago, lying between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and the surrounding countries located the fourth largest sea. The Aral Sea was important for the fishing community. It provided means of survival for millions. Towards the end of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century, the Aral Sea was virtually depleted of 90% of the water that it had held just some 20 years before. Now, it is known as the Arakum Desert. The culprit? Cotton. Known as the thirsty crop, cotton consumes on average 10,000 liters of water per kilo of produce, or roughly 2.2 pounds, meaning it would take on average 2,700 liters to make one cotton shirt and 7,500 liters for a pair of pants. Though this is a lot of water, many of the areas that cotton is grown in suffers from high levels of water stress, making the situation even worse. With the continued use of water being taken from the Aral Sea to be put into the growth and production of cotton in these areas, coastal communities in a short time found themselves no longer on the coast and without fish as a means of food and income. But instead, they were left with the aftermath of harmful pesticides and are mixed with dust, creating a dangerous situation. Because of this harmful mixture, many nearby villages suffered the consequences of not only no fish and no water nearby, but also the exposure of chemicals caused many of which to develop cancers and lung diseases. Almost 30 years after the recession of water from these areas, about 80% of cancers are of the throat and lungs and can mostly be linked back to this disaster. The Aral Sea is one of only many instances that havoc has been brought by the textile and apparel industry. It is believed to be among the world's most polluting and third largest industry after technology and automobiles. Through cotton is a big component of production of clothes, water also plays its role in the industry as a means of growth and staining of the fabrics through dyes. As fast fashion becomes more popular with the generations of tomorrow, more clothing is being created. For every season, there is a new look, and with those new looks comes new styles of clothing and colors. It is an estimate that as the fashion industry goes, as of right now, 79 billion cubic meters, or about 32 million Olympic swimming pools, is expected to be increased by 50% by the year 2030. Because of the fashion is so extensive and ever-expanding, many countries like China and India's water sources have been pronounced dead because of illegal dumping of harsh chemicals into their water sources. It has turned the water into dark pigments of black and many other colors, and have also had layers of foam and film covering the top layers. These dyes have become so concentrated in these water sources that it has killed plants and aquatic life in these ecosystems. Dumping is the cheapest way to get rid of wastewater after it has served its purpose instead of being treated. Though there are regulations against it, the industry is so big and vast that there is no way to control the illegal dumping. Even in places like China, where there are centralized treatment plants for the chemical-ridden waters, often because of the sheer size of the industry and waste output, it cannot cope with the volume. In places like these, systems are becoming so polluted beyond repair that the risk of cancer in these areas has increased by some 2,000 times. With the continuation of fashion trends, as of 2017, cotton uses 2.5 of the world's arable land, huge amounts of pesticides, fertilizers, and water to grow. Cotton has also caused vast amounts of damage in the form of erosion on the lands. By continuing this trend of illegal dumping of dyes into our water sources, taking vast quantities of water from water-stressed areas, and the amount of pollution and chemicals poured into the ground and air, in production and cultivation, it will not be possible to continue this process much longer on the scale that we have.
All brands create equally, and the different brands have different values. Some of the largest brands in fashion today, specifically brands known to America, are H&M, the second largest retailer in the world, PVH, the parent company to brands such as Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger, VH, parent company to Vans and North Face, Nike, Gap Incorporated, Inditex, another one of the largest global retailers, parent company to brands such as Zara, and then Dior, and Adidas, just to name a few. This list is very different from the one below it, which are some of the brands leading the fight for more sustainable fashion. These brands include Patagonia, Levi's, Pact, People's Tree, and Eileen Fisher. Patagonia is commonly credited towards being one of the first brands to have sustainability and environmentalism be a main priority. This idea has lasted since their founding in 1973. In fact, the pop-up shown is what you first see when you open up Patagonia's website, which you can see highlights the importance of shopping responsibly. In the last couple of years, a few large retailers have realized the importance of using sustainable resources, or at the very least have realized that consumers realized. H&M is one that has recently decided they need to make a switch, though it has been reluctant. This can be seen by H&M's explanation on their website, where they state that they are trying to source sustainably, despite it being challenging. The company VH is quite a bit further along in transitioning to ethical materials. Their website consists of a page explaining what they are doing to be sustainable and why it is so important for large brands to step up. Something that is worth mentioning is how, out of the brands I mentioned, very few have their materials easily found online. This may mean brands have something to hide, or know that they shouldn't be using the materials they do, or they don't consider material usage a topic of importance, which also indicates a lack of care towards sustainability. So what are brands using? There are many materials used to make clothing, including lyocell, lute, hemp, synthetics, rubber, polyester, nylon, and many more, but none are used nearly as much as cotton. However, not all cotton is created equally, and there are many different ways of sourcing it. On Patagonia's site, they display not only their most used materials, but some of their different ways to obtain cotton, such as recycled and organic. Pact is another brand passionate about sustainability. In fact, it is the forefront of their brand. You may see Pact in the aisles at Whole Foods. They discuss the prevalence of cotton and why they get theirs where they do. Inditex has recently decided that they need to focus more on shifting to sourcing cotton sustainably. They highlight the benefits to ethical cotton usage and say that they are trying to move more towards using organic and recycled cotton. This is a brand not commonly seen as sustainable, but at least their Marshall usage is starting to change. Adidas does not go into deep detail on their website, but they are sure to mention that they don't use conventional cotton. Levi's have made it known since the beginning that they care deeply about sustainable resources, and their website shows that. They state that cotton is crucial to what they make, and because of this, they do what they can to source it as responsibly as possible. These are just a few examples of brands showing that they care about cotton usage. It is very important to note that these brands are not that standard, although some may be extremely popular. Most brands do not offer this information, and this suggests that they don't focus on sustainable cotton sourcing. And just because they say it is important to source responsibly does not necessarily mean that the brand does it. The two primary types of cotton used are organic cotton and conventional cotton. Organic uses much less water and energy, is easier to recycle, and is made without pesticides and chemicals. Conventional cotton, on the other hand, requires a lot of water. In fact, it takes 2,720 liters of water for just one shirt. And it also takes over 20,000 liters of water just to make 1 kilogram of cotton. The way that this cotton is produced makes it considered an unsustainable resource. The sustainability and environmental impact of a brand the sustainability and environmental impact of a brand is about more than just the materials used. It also has to do with general quality. Organic cotton can be used to make thin and cheap quality clothes. The cost behind the low price. Low-cost clothes are more appealing to customers, making them want to buy more and more often. However, these cheap clothes do not last as long, and because of this, they quickly contribute to global waste. So why don't people just buy higher quality clothing? The main reason is cost. You can't expect people to always buy expensive clothing. College kids can't afford a $40 shirt every time they ruin one. Expensive brands struggle to keep up with all the quick fashion trends, as it is more costly to produce clothes than for cheaper brands. This also deters shoppers. On the right is a similar style coat from both H&M and North Face, with a price difference of over $200. The reviews for the North Face one are 5 out of 5 stars, with high praise on quality, durability, performance, and fit. The H&M coat has 4 out of 5 stars, and while many compliment the style, it is reported to be thin and not very warm. Essentially, it is not about practicality. The H&M coat will also likely last far less long as the North Face. Clothes and brands are far more than what you see at first, and just because two items look the same does not mean that their impact on the earth is similar.
Fast fashion mobilizes the growing issue of consumers buying cheap in-season clothes and then discarding them as soon as they are no longer trending or in style.
This negative attribute of fast fashion has caused consumers to be quietly adding to the growing landfills and pollution problems in our world. So consumers like fast fashion because it's cheap clothes, and if you look at the class levels, middle class and lower class, purchase more fast fashion to be able to keep up with the constant changing fashion trends, along with being able to just afford it because it is affordable. The fast fashion is a feasible way to buy these clothes because the material is cheap enough to be affordable, and then quote quote good quality enough to be worn a couple times. The United States is considered a throwaway society, meaning that we are constantly buying and throwing away clothes. Even if people give all their clothes to Goodwill instead of just like throwing it away in the trash, there would still be a lot of clothes thrown away because Goodwill can't even accept all that type of clothes due to like cleanliness, materials, and stuff like that. So there's always going to be clothes that's thrown away, and there's also like the terms of cleaning out your closet, so like spring and fall closet cleaning. So everyone's always cleaning out their closet, getting new clothes, and there's like this constant like cycle of throwing away clothes and getting new clothes. And then we look at like the negative social aspect of wearing clothes. It's like last season, like people would be like, oh my gosh, that's so last season. So then there's like that whole social negative aspect of it. And then according to a study by Holly, about 68 pounds of clothing a year is discarded, which is crazy because there's about 1/7 of that also that's recycled or reused. And then when I like look back at my year, I feel like I gave away a good bit of my clothes, but I can't see it adding up to 68 pounds. But then my mom, she goes through clothes so fast, and I can see hers adding up to a number that high. So it's just crazy about how it's different for each person, but it all ends up adding up to such a like large number. And then most textiles end up in landfills, which seems pretty counteractive because they're constantly making more clothes. And for example, if like we gave all those clothes to like the needy, or we made less, there would be less clothes or like less textiles that are going to landfills. And then another issue is that fast fashion is made out of like the products for the fast fashion are made of synthetic material, and synthetic materials don't decompose, so they'll just sit in the landfills for a good amount of time. Some synthetic polymers can sit in landfills for up to 200 years, but most will just sit there forever. Clothes made from natural materials like wood decompose. However, an issue with that is that they produce methane or CO2 sometimes, which contributes to the global warming issue. And if people were burning their clothes, that also causes a large CO2 problem, and about one garbage truck of clothes is burned every second. And so that's just so much CO2 and pollution that's constantly going up into our atmosphere. Another impact from the consumers are that we do wash our clothes, obviously, and then the synthetic material in the fast fashion is a large pollutant due to the synthetic microfibers that are like being washed, and then once the water drains, it goes down with it. And then the washing machines aren't made to be able to catch those like microfibers, and then most water treatment plants are not made to filter out these pollutants. Therefore, it circles back up into our water systems, and then the water gets put in our like food, and then we end up eating it or drinking it, and it's back in our bodies.
All right, so for our next topic, it's going to be society's mindset on fast fashion. This topic is going to be split up into 4 sections. How is industry growing with rapid consumerism? Why do we keep buying from fast fashion brands if we already know if they are bad for us and for the environment? Future outcome at this rate, at the rate that we are already proceeding in, and possible alternatives. Now, this slide is very important because it'll help us understand fast fashion. Shopping for clothing was once considered an event. Consumers would save up to buy clothing at certain times of the year. That changed in the late 1990s as shopping became a form of entertainment and demand for clothing increased. Then, bam, enter fast fashion. As we can see here, there are models on the runway. Now, these clothing pieces on the runway were now accessible in clothing stores, and people can buy these clothing pieces at a very low price because they said, oh, it's on trend, so I'll buy them now that they're here at my home store. Now, as we can see here, our consumer is very unhappy with the quality of these products. So, she, or the consumer as a whole, is quick to throw away the items, and they're going to move on to the next trend. How is industry growing with rapid consumerism? This is the question we are aiming for. It's estimated that consumers are buying 3 to 4 times the amount of apparel they did in the 1980s, but disposing of it at an equally accelerated rate. As we can see here, there are trends on trends on trends, all in the name of fashion. Now, why the heck do we keep buying from fast fashion brands? Let's start with the definition. The Cambridge Dictionary defines fast fashion as clothes that are made and sold cheaply so that people can buy new clothes often. This definition suggests fast fashion is an enabler. It is a system that allows people to achieve something. In this case, it's buy new clothes often, which is a claim that some may argue is a positive. Fast fashion's pro side? Didn't know there was a pro side, making it readily available to people who cannot afford to spend tons of money on clothing. Okay, sure. However, those who argue for this side do not take into account the extensive negative side effects of making clothing available on such an extensive scale, not at such a low cost. Future outcome at this rate that we are proceeding in right now. We have increased carbon footprint. Basically, what this says is that synthetic fibers and polyester, they have the biggest impact on their environment because polyester emits up to 3 times more carbon dioxide than other fibers such as cotton. And this material can also take hundreds of years to degrade. However, we don't have much luck with this because 50% of our clothing is made from polyester, which means more greenhouse gases, and that leads to global warming. Water consumption and pollution. Approximately 2 billion pairs of jeans are produced every year, and a pair of jeans takes up to 7,000 liters of water to produce. We can see a very high value for the production of a shirt as well. And we also have hazardous chemicals. They permanently damage the environment, and they are used in the production of clothing. Up to 20% of water pollution can be attributed to the clothing industry. This means that water pollution can lead to less clean water to drink. Next, we have dumping landfills and waste. Discarding clothes is contributing greatly to mass waste. As we can see here, that this big value, 80% of the clothes discarded by consumers in major cities, could be reused. However, they end up in landfills instead. Most of these clothes are made from non-biodegradable materials. Non-biodegradable, if you don't know already, they are materials that cannot degrade along with the speed that natural materials degrade. So, like soil, they cannot degrade naturally at the speed that soil degrades. This means more mass waste of non-biodegradable materials, more pollution. This leads to more pollution. Continued. We have unfair labor practices. We have talked about this already in the previous topics. However, keep in mind that women comprise of more than 80% of textile workers globally, of whom work overtime for little pay. Child labor also we need to take into account. And of course, there is a lack of regulation, which means that there is exposure to hazardous work conditions. It leads to increased numbers in deaths of these people who work in garment factories. Health dangers. Formaldehyde is sprayed on clothing to prevent mildewing and wrinkling during shipping. If you did not know that, I didn't know that either before finding this out. Extensive exposure to this chemical
As we can see, through overconsumption of clothing, this leads to severe allergic reactions. Clothes made of synthetic materials are often made with chemicals that are toxic. Textile workers, they are who are most exposed to these chemicals, and they are increasingly more prone to health complications. This means that there is an accumulation of toxins and that they can predispose one to terminal ailments such as cancer. Possible alternatives. Retailers such as H&M are focusing on the long term and looking at solutions to reduce their environmental footprint. I have included one of their ads. Although they are one of the main culprits of selling these clothing pieces at a low price, they often recycle the goods in the countries where they originated. The fabric is reprocessed into different goods such as blankets, insulation, carpet padding, and pillow stuffing. We should also be encouraged to choose sustainable fashion brands that produce clothes from natural fibers instead. That includes cotton, silk, cashmere wool, and different types of wool or linen. Conclusion. Ultimately, making clothes greener depends not on just industries making a change, but also we as a whole, the general population, changing our habits as well. We tend to wear garments for less time, disposing of them when they fall apart or go out of style, and very little of the clothing we do discard gets reused. The clothing choices we make do not just affect us personally, they also have global implications on the environment and the livelihoods of millions of people in developing economies. If we all choose a slow fashion way of life by reducing our consumption, we can alleviate these detrimental impacts. Now, of course, this is not going to be solved within 2 days or even overnight. And sometimes we don't even get the results that we expect. However, if we don't do good the first time, we can always say this. Yes, I'll just grow and do much better next time. Here, we're excited. Thank you very much for your time and attention.